So this summer we're in a study of the Gospel of Mark, the book of Mark, and the very first sentence of the book makes an extraordinary claim. Mark 1:1, this is the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. He is divine. This is God among us. That's the amazing claim in the very first sentence. And then the first few chapters, Mark tells us of event after miraculous event where Jesus is doing things only God could be capable of doing. And he's stacking up evidence to prove that this is who Jesus is, who he must be. And people who witness the works of Jesus are struggling to comprehend the awesome possibilities. And so we hear things like this, Mark 1:27, amazement gripped the audience and they began to discuss what had happened. What sort of new teaching is this? They asked excitedly. It has such authority, even evil spirits obey him. And then a few chapters later, Mark 4, the disciples, his own apostles, were absolutely terrified. Who is this man? They asked each other. Even the wind and the waves obey him. Well, now we're in chapter 8. So we are exactly halfway through the Gospel of Mark. There's 16 chapters. We're in chapter 8. So halfway through, do his disciples finally get it? Have they understood yet who he is? So Jesus asks them what I would say is a simple but strange question. Mark 8:27. We're going to spend some time here if you want to turn your Bibles here. Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. And as they were walking along, he asked them, who do people say I am? Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say you're one of the other prophets. And then he asked them, but who do you say I am? And Peter replied, you are the Messiah. Now, the reason I say that's a strange question is Jesus did not take opinion polls asking what people thought of him or if they liked him, because what's important is who he is. I don't know about you, but I've never asked someone, who do people say I am? That's just kind of a weird question, right? But his identity, his nature is the key to everything. And you listen to all the other guesses, what other people are saying about him. They all say he's something special. He's a prophet. He's maybe even John the Baptist resurrected. But they're still thinking of him as just a man. But if he is who the gospel says he is, if this is God, well, that vaults our relationship with Jesus into a whole other exclusive category. This means he is the authority. He is first priority over everything else. If these are the words of God, then the Bible is the most important book on earth, period. These are the essential words for us to read. If this is God, there's no other relationship more important to us than the one that we have with him. Nobody can do more for us than Jesus. So no wonder Jesus didn't ask what they thought about him. Because if he is the holy God, our opinions, honestly, don't matter. He doesn't answer to us. If he speaks the truth, then whether we agree with him or whether we like what he says, doesn't change what is true, what is right. We must subjugate our lives to him. We must conform to him. So Peter gives the right answer, the Messiah, the Christ. But he doesn't fully understand what perhaps that means. Because for them, that meant he was the fulfillment of God's plan. He's the promised Savior spoken of throughout the Old Testament. He's both king and priest. But Jesus still needs to clarify what he's going to do as Messiah. Because like other Jews at that time, the apostles are expecting a king who's going to be a political liberator. They envision an earthly king who's going to restore the former glory of Israel, another King David, a warrior who's going to expel the Romans and clean up the corruption among the Jewish leaders. And with his miraculous power, imagine what he can do. So he corrects their expectations about what he's here to do and what sort of kingdom he is establishing. So verse 31. So then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man, that's him, just another name for himself, must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law. He'd be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. And as he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Now, I get why Peter would be upset. I mean, this is like hearing your coach say that he intends to let the other team win. And he's inviting you to come along and lose with him. Because a Messiah who gets killed would be seen as a false Messiah, a fake, a failure. This is nothing like what they expected. But who's Peter reprimanding? He's reprimanding God. He's rebuking the very one that he just declared was his king. And he's doing something far worse than that. He's doing something worse than what he even realizes, because he is echoing the same temptation that Satan has been using against Jesus. Think about it. Of all the temptations, and we're told that he experienced all the temptations that we do, what would be the strongest temptation, the worst temptation? I think it'd be for avoiding the cross, right? I mean, imagine how horrible to know your entire life that was waiting for you. But to escape the cross would be to cede humanity to hell, to give all of earth over to Satan. And so Jesus snaps back. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples who were listening to this conversation and then reprimanded Peter. Get behind me, or get away from me, Satan. You're not seeing things, you're seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's. Now, obviously, his disciples don't get it yet. We're halfway through. They still don't understand what it means that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. So it's time to take them to school. So he sits them down, verse 34. Then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in this adulterous and sinful day, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Jesus knows he's headed for a cross. And if we're going to follow him, we're following him there too. We're following him all the way to a cross. And a cross means death. That was his purpose. That is its sole purpose. So to take up your cross means to die, or to be willing to die. But this meaning of this cannot be limited to just actual crucifixion or literal physical death. He can't just be talking about that. And he interprets this within what he says. He tells us this is broader than that. It's giving up your own way, possibly sacrificing your plans and your expectations to follow wherever Jesus leads. We can't hang on to all of that. We have to be willing to die to that, to sacrifice even that. Luke's gospel, there's 4 gospels, 4 stories of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Luke's gospel tells the same story, but he adds one word to this challenge that we hear from Jesus. Then he said to the crowd, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me. Daily, every day. Jesus made the same decision every day. Committed every morning when he got up to continue on with his mission that he knew was going to lead him to the cross so that he could save mankind from their sins. It's essential that they understand that. So for the second time, he prepares them for what lies ahead. So turn to Mark 9, starting verse 30. So leaving that region, they traveled throughout Galilee. Jesus didn't want anyone to know he was there, for he wanted to spend more time with his disciples and teach them. And he said to them, the Son of Man, him, Jesus, is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later, he will rise from the dead. And they didn't understand what he was saying. However, they were afraid to ask what he meant. Well, of course, it's going to be difficult to comprehend how his death would be a victory. So is this hyperbole? Jesus talks a lot in hyperbole. He exaggerates for emphasis. So is he saying, guys, this is going to be really difficult, but we're going to overcome? I mean, what does he mean about rising from the dead? Because they're still thinking this is a march to glory. This is King Jesus who's going to go assume his throne when he get to Jerusalem. And so they're debating who should get what position in Jesus' new government. I think that's a lot of the conversations among the 12. And Jesus, who knows the hearts of all men, before he ever asks this question, knows the answer. But he asks in verse 33. After they arrived at Capernaum and settled in a house, Jesus asked his disciples, "What were you discussing out on the road?" But they didn't answer because they've been arguing about which one of them was the greatest. Kind of embarrassing. This argument, I think it was, I'm guessing it was maybe, like, who deserves the most important cabinet positions? When we get to Jerusalem, when King Jesus establishes his government, they're talking about, well, who should be Secretary of State? And how much do you think I'll get paid when I'm mayor of Jerusalem? I think those are the sort of who's the greatest conversations that they're having. And they aren't getting it. They are not getting it. So back to school we go again. Verse 35. So he sat down, called the 12 disciples over to him and said, "Listen, guys, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else." And then he put a little child among them. And taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not only me, but also my Father who sent me." Now, in that culture, parents loved their kids, of course, but a kid had no status. They were dependents without rights or power. So Jesus pulled to himself the one who would be most easily discounted in that society. He points that one and says, "In my kingdom, the real leaders are the ones looking out for this, for the one that everyone else overlooks. You want to be great? You think of the least of these, not yourself. Love those down here, not the ones you think you can leverage to elevate your own status." And that's what Jesus is doing. He's headed to a cross because he loves those who don't deserve it. The ones like us who are yet sinners, who can never repay him. And it's at this point in the book of Mark that the book pivots. Because before now, the action, we're kind of wandering around Galilee, we're out in the country. But now for the rest of the book of Mark, we are headed on this determined march towards Jerusalem and the cross. Everything from this point on is going towards that. And so for the third time, Jesus sits down with his disciples and outlines what is going to happen when we get to the end of this trip. And he is more detailed than ever this time. So Mark 10:32. They were now on the way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And the disciples were filled with awe, and the people following behind were overwhelmed with fear. And taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus once more began to describe everything that was about to happen to him. "Listen," he said, "we're going up to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of religious law, and they will sentence him to death and hand him over to the Romans, and they will mock him and spit on him and flog him with a whip and kill him. But after 3 days, he will rise again." He cannot speak any more plainly. This is obviously not metaphor. This is a blow-by-blow preview of what lies ahead. And again, he takes them back to school to reshape their expectations of what it means to follow him, to be in his kingdom, because he's going to die once he gets there. This is not the kingdom. He's not setting the kingdom that they expect. So he's trying to tell them, guys, here is the kingdom that I am establishing through my death. So Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be my servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now let's be clear, Jesus is not commanding us to recklessly burn out, to say yes to everything, to trash our health serving everybody else. I'm convinced that's not what he's preaching here. You remember in last week's sermon, when we're in Mark 6, Jesus took his disciples on a retreat to give them a break. So this is a leader who often withdrew himself, went by himself up on the mountain to refresh himself, to pray, to get some peace. So he understands about a sustainable pace. This is the same God who established a Sabbath rest, after all. So I don't think this is pressing us towards burnout. I think he's just repositioning our priorities and what we value. I mean, wouldn't you like to work for a boss who treats everyone the way he wants to be treated? Who gives you vacation time the way that he wants to use his vacation time? I mean, wouldn't it be nice to be in a church where the leaders are humbly serving and you're greeted by people who sincerely care about you? That's what Jesus is creating. So think about this. If our king is a servant, the highest position in his kingdom is that of servant. I mean, it sounds upside down, but that's the wonderful mystery of what Jesus is calling us to in his kingdom, in his church. That's what he's freeing us to do. So last Sunday, we learned that we can trust Jesus as our provider. He knows what you need, when you need it, and he can provide it. So we saw that proven through the feeding of the 5,000 and then the feeding of the 4,000. And what he was teaching was that means that his disciples can be content with what they have. Because we see through eyes of abundance, God's abundance, and we can put our hope in him, not in our possessions. We put our hope in him. Again, that sounds upside down. Only having enough for today and being satisfied with that. But Jesus is freeing us to operate like that. So that whole concept we talked about last week is summed up in the idea of daily bread. God will give us what is necessary for that day. And then the next day, he'll do the same. We can trust that. Stephen Langley pointed out to me last week a verse that captures that daily bread ethos well. It's in Proverbs, actually. Proverbs 30, give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. That prayer takes a lot of faith. But that's the point. Daily bread forces us to depend on God every day. And that's where he wants us, depending on him every single day, because that's where he can do his best work with us. So to follow Jesus requires us to be content with daily bread. You want to follow Jesus? Daily bread. That's what we signed up for. And now we hear Jesus tell us that every day we must also choose to pick up our cross, to be willing to die to some of our selfish desires, maybe even some of our dreams, to follow him. And again, that is a tough prayer. That's a challenging way to live. But the challenge that we accept when we follow Jesus is daily bread and a daily cross. And when I think about those words on that screen, I realize that ends a lot of my complaints. This is what I signed up for. When I declared that Jesus is going to be my king, I'm going to be a disciple, that's what I signed up for. I signed up with being content with what I have. I signed up to be a servant to others and not complain about that, to not keep score comparing what others have with what I don't have. I don't worry about that because I've got him. That's what I signed up for. Now that may not sound very appealing, but in all these teachings, the part that I didn't highlight was that in every one of these teachings, there's a promise of a reward. There's a mention of a future glory. Jesus was our example. We're following him. And in this book, we're following him all the way to the cross. But what came after that? What came after the cross? Well, resurrection, victory, life forever. When you get to the end of the gospel, the big reveal is it's all worth it. Don't forget the reward. Live in the reward. So we're going to end with, I'm going to tell you a story to give you some perspective on why Jesus says the reward of being one of his disciples is so worth it. This is a true story, actually. This happened just last month. Last month, thousands of Norwegians were ecstatic when they were notified that they had won a share of the Euro jackpot lottery drawing. And they had. That was right. That was true. But before any money was deposited in their accounts, they received another notification. And it turned out their winnings were not as big as they expected. Not even close. There's this company called Norsk Tipping that distributes the winnings from Eurojackpot. And Eurojackpot is based in Germany and reports amounts in euro cents. Norsk Tipping then converts that money into Norwegian currency, the kroner. But a manual error in the game system's coding caused prize amounts to be multiplied by 100 rather than divided by 100. So to put it in our currency, so if someone had won the equivalent of $1,000, they were notified they just won $100,000. That's a big difference. So people were already planning vacations and home renovations and buying new cars when they received the second notification about the mistake. Turns out they were not 100 times richer. But that number grabbed my attention because it reminded me of something that Jesus had said. In Mark, in the section we just covered, when Jesus talks about the rewards of being a disciple, he says, we will be richer. Do you remember how much richer? 100 times richer. All this teaching about sacrifice and humility and taking up a cross, maybe it was coming a bit overwhelming. Maybe it's coming a little bit depressing for the apostles. I mean, after all, they'd given up everything, their homes, their families, their jobs, and they've been following him around for over 2 years now. And so in Mark 10:28, Peter began to speak up. We've given up everything to follow you, he said. Yes, Jesus replied. And Jesus does not apologize for that, does he? The thing you notice in Scripture is Jesus never apologizes. He never apologizes for what he asks of us. He says, yeah, you did. And I assure you that everyone who's given up house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or property for my sake and for the good news will receive now, in this life, right now, in return, 100 times as many houses, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and property, along with persecution. And in the world to come, that person will have eternal life. But many who are the greatest now will be the least important then. And those who seem least important now will be greatest then. Jesus assures them that whatever you give up to follow him, you will find it 100 times over. I know people who've been disowned by their family to follow Christ. What Jesus promises is you'll find family 100 times over in the church. Whatever you gave up, those relationships, you're going to find here in his church. Whatever you give up, it's going to be given back to you, a heaping measure poured back into your life. Whatever dreams you gave up, what you'll find is a life 100 times better. And if it seems that you're losing so much now, that you're giving up so much now, Jesus promises that in eternity, that the true greatness of your faith is going to be celebrated. You won't regret any of it. Jesus promises that. So if you ask me what it will mean to be a Christian, I'm going to tell you daily bread and a daily cross. And that requires a lot of faith. That's going to mean a lot of sacrifice. But to be a disciple of Jesus is a good life. The sacrifice is complete. And I mean complete. Jesus tells us everything is on the table. Everything has to be on the table. Nothing can come between us and him. Nothing can be deemed more valuable for us than him. It's all on the table. The sacrifice is complete. And the humility is hard. It can feel like losing but the reward is priceless. That's the life. It's a good life. That's your lesson. Let's stand and sing.